With justice for Kathy Page yet to be served, a lot of scrutiny has fallen on the Vidor Police Department. So are they incompetent? Are they malicious? There's a lot to get into. First, let's take a look at this video.
There are so many murky details surrounding the murder of Kathy Page. However, one aspect of the case that seems unanimously agreed upon is the botched investigation that followed. The crime scene was not correctly cordoned off. The initial crime scene photos were taken on a camera that didn't have any film. Police were initially denied entry into Steve Page's house, the same house where he alleges he and Kathy had consensual sex the night of her murder. Vidor law enforcement didn't obtain a search warrant until after Steve had deep cleaned his carpet due to an accidental spill. With so many loose ends and so little accountability, Kathy's father took matters into his own hands. Starting in 1993, James Fulton has erected a number of billboards blasting local police and urging justice for his daughter. The billboards line a field alongside the I-10 freeway, and Fulton assures that they will remain there until he dies or justice is served.
So, Mark, what do you think? Is this a matter of incompetence, or like they say on the billboards, did someone take a bribe? Is there sort of a conspiracy, a cover-up going on here?
Let me speak to the bribe thing first, because it's interesting. You wonder who would have bribed him. Steve Page would be the likely guy who'd want to bribe the cops.
Or the family of Steve Page, who were covering things up before.
You'd think maybe there'd be some evidence that monies were transferred, or that there'd been, that was never mentioned in anything I could find anyway. Also, it would have to be a pretty significant amount of money, you'd think, maybe more significant than the family would have access to. So then would there be some other deep-pocketed party to all of this who'd want to keep it quiet? It just doesn't track for me. And so it's tough, because the cops seem so stupid about investigating this that you almost think there must be some conspiracy. How can there not be? But I suspect it really is incompetence. The only thing that strikes me as, wow, really that incompetent, is the fact that they really never searched his home. I mean,
until after another family had moved in there, they did eventually test the carpet sample that the family said, oh, this is the same carpet from when Steve Page lived here. And they tested the carpet and it came out inconclusive. Of course it did.
Well, it's years later and he's cleaned it. We've already gone through how he deep cleaned it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, at that point, it's absurd to search it.
But was it sort of like a willful, knowledgeable incompetence, in the sense that these were people that, while people will say that they were friends with Steve Page, the police department were, as far as I can tell, and what people were saying in the civil trial, is that they were acquaintances. They knew each other, they had grown up together. It's a very small town. Vidor is very small. And that they probably just weren't thinking that he should be treated as the prime suspect, as at least a person of interest, that he should be questioned, that he should be separated, and that you should get the testimony of the daughters as well in case they heard anything. I think that they just kind of trusted him too much because they knew who he was.
Right, I think there's a good old boy quality to this, and I think that we see in literature and on television, you know, the small town cop who has got a big-brained, big city view toward detective work. And you know what? That's just generally not the case. The small-town cops and the good old boy network, they're just, oh, yeah, well, you know, Steve, we're going to look at everybody. We'll probably be back to talk to you about this. You know, this sort of...
It was a little bit, that's low-key for a murder investigation.
Casual,
it was way too casual for what was happening. I think back to statements that Detective Sergeant Ray Mosley has made, who's sort of the point person on the case for a long time. And he was just sort of saying, look, we want this case to be solved, but there's just no evidence. So what are we supposed to do if there's no evidence? Dude, there's no evidence because you're not searching the premises. There's no evidence because the crime scene was not partitioned off correctly, because you're not photographing things correctly. There's little details that that's hard to find corroboration for, that really shouldn't have slipped through the cracks. For example, They don't have photos of Steve's appearance on the night of the murder, or the photos from the house.
Huge.
And
one of supposed to be a scratch on his face.
Right, there's supposed to be a scratch on his face, but then, upon looking back, people are saying, well, I can't really remember that. You should have photos. That's like on a checklist. Those are the things that you write off.
Imagine that, talking to a bunch of people. I think he had a scratch on his face. I don't think it's and the cops didn't photograph it. I mean, it's so basic.
It shouldn't be. These are the sort of things that you really shouldn't have to dwell on too much. They should be foregone, proven conclusions. Okay, so we know what he looked like, so it's not just what, oh, was he in his boxers or were they pajama shorts? Because that tells a very different story,
right. In other words, there should be protocol on everything. There should be a checklist that they go down. But they didn't even have film on the camera, so that's how little that any checklist was followed.
Yeah.
It's just, it's ham-fisted. It's ridiculously incompetent.
And another thing that I think is interesting is that there is obviously DNA that was recovered through the autopsy on Kathy's body, because they were able to determine that the partner that she'd had sex with that night had had a vasectomy. So then you have Steve admit that he had sex with her. So at least we can account for what that DNA is there for. But there must have been other DNA, right?
Right, under the fingernails or some kind of other
Right, I would think that there would have been,
yeah.
But then I also remember that this is 1991, and this was before DNA was widely accepted as a corroborative, scientifically sound method of proving someone's guilt and or innocence.
It had just begun, and exactly, it wasn't viewed as, so the collection of DNA, I'll give them a pass on perhaps not collecting that with the same rigor that they might have 10 years later.
Right. I mean, I will give them a pass on not collecting it as much, but I think that the DNA is probably destroyed, because I think that if it wasn't, then there'd be no reason why not to test other things.
Completely agree. In fact, if they were really serious about it, they would say, okay, put it all in a file, put it all in an evidence locker, and I want to leave it or leave it alone. This is, if it's an unsolved case, then we still have a chance at solving it on down the way. What is also clear is there is no real, despite what they say, I understand when the media comes around now with the movie Three Billboards and everything, now everybody's, oh yeah, we're somewhere out there, there's somebody who knows something. It's ridiculous. You guys know something, you have the evidence, you've let it go cold, and you're letting it die. I mean, die again.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also thinking of, from everything that I've read, okay, where could they find scraps of DNA here and there? And something that I remember reading was that they could tell that she had been redressed because of where certain blood markings were on her body, because her nose had been broken. And so she had been, bled out, and she was, cleaned up and all that stuff. And they could find little traces of blood on her clothing. And that makes me think, okay, well then maybe if Steve had a scratch on his nose, or let's say the unknown suspect had something on there, why aren't you testing that clothing just to see? And I feel as though it's either lost or destroyed, which is not totally unheard of. And so we'll just never know. But we're still gonna do our best to try and figure this out. Now, Mark and I are gonna give you our version of what we think happened that night, which I wanna hear your take first, and then I'll let you know if I differ.
Okay, I think we do know. I think it's pretty clear that she was having this relationship with a new boyfriend after her separation now with her husband.
Brand new separation.
And I think he was angry, and as is so often, and you detail on the show a lot, the husband or spouse in that anger and resentment is sitting there stewing, right? He's there with the kids while she's out having sex with, or in his mind, and he's right, if that's his mind goes to that place, meeting with her new boyfriend. When she arrives back, she showers, as she does before she goes to bed. She takes off her jewelry, takes off her makeup, and he rapes her. And he does it in the living room, where apparently there was blood evidence that was destroyed by Steve Page. And he kills her, strangles her and kills her. Redresses her, comes up with this awful plan to cover his tracks by putting her in the car, rolling the car into that ditch, and then going back into the house, getting into his boxer shorts, and waiting. And
doing laundry.
He does his laundry, which obviously must have had blood on it. He's just killed her, and it wasn't a clean kill. I mean, there was evidence. There was contact evidence, I believe, and there was evidence, as we know, where we think, in the carpet. The cops arrive, and he begins his BS story. The cops, either wittingly or unwittingly, play right into it by not searching the house, which is a treasure trove of evidence, if they had just searched it. And so, in a sense, their incompetence is complicit in the cover-up. But his guilt, to me, is complete. And I'm trying to think if I've left any evidence out. I mean, the evidence that she had been, someone had had sex with her, had a vasectomy. He explains that away, but to me that was rape. I don't think that she wanted to have sex with this guy who she's just separated from a couple of days prior.
Her friends and her sisters would actually support that as well, saying that they didn't believe that they had had consensual sex that night, that Kathy wasn't interested in that and was very excited about this person that she was seeing. I agree with pretty much what you said as far as that timeline does fit. In fact, I think it's really hard to make anything else fit. And I have gone through the theory of, okay, perhaps there was an outside person that it just doesn't make sense that a mafia killing certainly wouldn't have even played out that way.
And a small town like that, I just don't buy that there were outside parties. I mean, everybody knows everybody.
Yeah, right. There's another detail that I think is worth mentioning that for me is sort of signaling of his guilt as well, which is that in every lie there is going to be an ounce of truth. And in his story, he's never, even though he'll like go back and forth on the timeline, specific timelines of things, he's always said that he saw Kathy in a towel that night, that they had had sex when she was wearing a towel. And I think that is probably true, that the last time he saw Kathy before attacking her was when she had come home from this night out and she'd taken off her makeup, taken off her jewelry, and she'd gotten into a shower and she'd come out in a towel. And I think it was a crime of passion, that he was just absolutely enraged and then just attacked her and murdered her. And
right, saw her and saw what he would no longer had,
right,
in his view.
Right.
And yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, I'm sure that enraged him.
And in the aftermath of this case that, again, is unsolved, even though it went to a civil trial, there's just been more heartbreak surrounding it. The daughters of Steve and Kathy, Erin and Monica, were just kids at the time, and they were both brought on to testify about the specifics of the grease stain at trial. And one of them has started a blog, but doesn't really keep up with it, about the billboards and her reflections on the billboards. And I guess perhaps surprisingly, although I don't know much about child psychology and how this would affect in the long term, it has been really hard. It's not like, oh, well, we know our dad did it. It's you lose one parent, it seems as though it's just the heartbreak of imagining losing another.
Right, right.
It's really hard to look at this. And then the youngest actually passed away of a drug-related overdose. It's unclear if it was the exact circumstances surrounding it, but just really sad.
No, it's tragedy on tragedy. It reminded me, learning about the kids, of the O.J. Simpson thing, because his kids were also very young, and it seemed, again, that there was so much evidence pointing to O.J. Simpson's killing of his wife and Ron Goldman. And so you end up with wondering, how do the kids process this later? And we don't really get the window on them that we do with these kids, that because there was a blog, as you say. And remember, they're left with Steve's family, and they're left with Steve. So you want to believe what you're being told over and over and over again.
And you're also left with Kathy's family and Kathy's father, who has put up all these billboards. They have said in the blog it's really hard to be around because you're obsessed with the awful, brutal, like horrific death of your mother.
Right.
Why do you want to hang around with that?
Right. So
you try and move on.
They walled themselves off from that part of the family, from her parents, pretty much. And the kids spent time with his family and him. So that's why they may have had those leanings. Her dad is right about everything he said on the billboards and about everything he did and everything he believes. I mean, he had a clear picture. By the way, it seems as though he didn't want to believe that his son-in-law had killed his daughter initially.
Yeah.
It was that moment that you described where he saw the cleaning of the carpet and this intense effort on the part of the family to clean up what he then realized was clearly the place where his daughter had been killed. It was then that he decided, wow, this is the guy who killed my daughter.
You can only imagine just how heavy a moment for a parent that might be. You know, in the wake of this tragedy, you're looking for an answer, and then it just hits you in the face, and it couldn't be more troubling or awful. Like, oh my gosh, you? I mean, they'd been married for something like 13 years at that time.
There had to be a lot of moments like that that sort of punctuated the horror. But I have a question for you, and that is, why couldn't, given even the inadequate evidence, I mean, it couldn't be complete because of all the things we've said, why couldn't they bring some kind of cogent case, some kind of doable case for murder against Steve Page?
I've thought about that. I was actually about to ask you something similar. I've gone back and forth. I wonder if perhaps they're afraid of double jeopardy. I wonder if too much of it is circumstantial. I have a feeling that the Page family would take the stand and be very compelling witnesses on the side of the defense. And then it would just be a matter of sort of who do you believe? Who's better in front of a jury? And I think that a lot of the evidence in the police work, if he had a good attorney, would just be eviscerated.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably why, but then I've also heard an argument for people, I've been looking through like web sleuths, a lot of people have been saying, we'll just at least take it to a trial. He's already out there, being free, at least have him sit through a criminal trial to show that we're at least trying to hold him accountable, and so that there could be justice to be done. That's what a lot of people are saying, which I think that there's a fair argument for, because he's already free now. So even if he's, even if he's found innocent, or at least not guilty, at least have him sit through a trial.
The DAs don't work like that, of course. They don't want to bring cases that they know that they're not going to win.
Yeah.
And that's probably the real reason. Although a lot of other stuff happens in government where they know it's not going to work out and they do it anyway just to make a point. So I don't understand why they couldn't do this. They did win at civil trial, right? Where the standard is
significantly lower, yeah. So they won at civil trial, so I guess that's some form of resolution. That's gonna do it for us today. Had you heard of this case before, the murder of Kathy Page? We'd love to hear your theories. I would like to give another shout out to my unofficial sponsor, Dayquil and Tea, for getting me through this episode.
Thank you, Grace.
Thank you to Mark Thompson for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more Murder with Friends, and we'll see you next time.